All right. I'm just going to start by welcoming everybody. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm really excited about this panel, and there's a lot of work and a lot of experience that's going into this one. So I'm really excited to share the information that they have with you. I'm just going to start with a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to keep this one pretty interactive. So feel free to use the Q&A. Feel free to use the chat function. I'll be monitoring both. Feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to speak. If you have a question that's timely, you don't need to save it to the end. These speakers here are very interactive, very knowledgeable, and have a lot to share. And I think it's really important to address the questions as they come up when that makes sense. So with that, I am going to turn it over to ESCA's Executive Director, Larry Arnaday, to kick us off. Larry?
Oh, thank you, Julie, and welcome everyone. We're very pleased to have you join us today, and what we feel is a very important subject, particularly within our industry today with everything that's going on around the country. And just a couple comments about the history of ESCA and the commitment that we have made over the years to security. The ESCA worker identification and security system, which most of you probably know of as the WIS system, we started that in 2009. And we currently, that system is being used in 25 venues across the country. And as of yesterday, we have a little bit over 40,000 active badges in use today. So it's obviously being used all over the country. And I've noticed, and when I've been in buildings that, did not require the WIS badge, that there were people coming in and security was looking at their WIS badges and just letting them go right on through. So it is pretty much universally accepted across the country. We did the work on the exhibition and meetings, exhibition meetings, security and safety initiative. We started that back in 2016 and worked with IAVM and IAEE on putting that program together for, I think we worked on it for about 2 years and finally finished the project in 2018. And that was a project, and Mark knows we spent weeks and weeks and weeks. Sometimes it felt like months meeting in that conference room over at the IAVM headquarters. But it's a very successful program, and it assisted us very much with universal acceptance of the WIS program. And with that, I think we'll introduce the topic for today's session, which is the importance of safety, but not at the expense of security. And that's something that's very important for all of us to keep in mind today. The session today, exhibition and venue security, protecting mass gatherings. And with that, I would like to introduce one of our esteemed panelists, Mr. Bill Flynn.
Thanks, Larry. Thanks, Julie, and all of the ESCA team and the IAVM team and my fellow panelists, Mark Herrera, Mark Camillo. Great honor, great opportunity to be with you folks today. Really appreciate it. Larry mentioned that initiative, and I was a part of that effort and was very pleased to be able to contribute to that very important work that brought the industry security people together to kind of develop those guidelines and best practices. So we've talked a lot this past year, obviously, about safety and how do we ensure that our venues are safe for patrons and staff to be able to start to get back to a degree of normalcy. And a big focus of our attention, our efforts, our resources has been towards, making these facilities safe from a COVID perspective. And clearly that continues to be a priority to ensure that patrons feel comfortable and safe. My concern is that we can't take our eye off the ball on security. The same threats that were out there pre-COVID still out there now that we're starting to get back to a degree of normalcy. In fact, the threat and the vulnerabilities may even be greater. And so we can't take our eye off the ball in those aspects of security. And I pulled up a few things here. I mean, DHS has come out recently, with a bulletin indicating that mass gatherings remain a potential target for terrorists and homegrown violent extremists. There's clearly been a new dynamic with the influx and growth and the volatility of domestic violent extremist groups. And that's an element of what we've all got to keep our eye on. Larry and Julie asked me to give some examples. So I did a little research on one of the case studies, and I'll be talking about an event that almost took place at a mass gathering facility in Tampa. In addition to DHS, the National Counterterrorism Center, NCTC, likewise came out and indicated that the pre-operational indicators are difficult to detect. In other words, individuals that are undertaking the planning cycle to undertake an attack, whether it's an active shooter event or something, vehicle ramming or bombing incident, they are much more difficult to detect. Oftentimes they're under the radar of local law enforcement and the intelligence community. So it just makes it all that more difficult for local law enforcement and federal partners to identify and put the finger on those kinds of evolving threats. Right after the Obama administration team was in place, they issued a National Terrorism Advisory System alert, NTAS. You may all recall the original green, yellow, red to highlight the elevation of a threat. Well, they replaced that with NTAS, but NTAS in essence, focuses our efforts and attention on what DHS recognizes as an area of concern and threat. And that was issued in late January of this year. And that NTAS alert is carried through the end of this month in April, at which time DHS will, once again evaluate and either extend that or determine that that threat has mitigated or gone away and there's less of a likelihood of a problem. But my instinct and guess tells me that NTAS alert will continue, and they're specifically concerned, about ideologically motivated violent extremists. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence, ODNI, came out March, so about a month ago, indicating that domestic violent extremist threats pose an elevated threat to the homeland in 2021. And so what we've witnessed in terms of with the breaching of the Capitol, what we've witnessed in terms of social unrest in different parts of our nation, from different aspects, is likely to continue throughout 2021. And they're motivated by a range of ideological, and they're galvanized by, what they witnessed in some cases as some success during the January 6th breaching of the Capitol and some other events that have taken place in the US. So they've been able to recruit more activists to their causes. Lone offenders will continue to pose a significant detection and disrupting challenges, as we talked about a minute ago at NCTC. At the same time, if we look at what transpired this past year from COVID, major crime categories were down in virtually all areas except shootings. Shootings in 2020 were up significantly. They continue to be up. The number of shootings that have happened just in the first few months of 2021 far surpass what was happening in 2020. So this is a phenomenon that is clearly of grave concern. It doesn't seem like we can, turn on the news or pick up a newspaper that there isn't some major mass shooting event taking place somewhere in the United States. And again, it poses some challenges for all of us. I think keeping our finger on the pulse of what kind of social unrest is happening in different parts of the country is something that we need to factor into our risk strategy. So this is a terrorism case that was thwarted by the FBI. It was less than a year ago. Some of you may be aware of it. Surprisingly, I don't think it got a whole lot of attention or publicity. Most of the time when these attacks are prevented, obviously they don't get the level of attention that successful attacks have taken. So it's a learning experience for us. I mean, if you look at the terrorist planning cycle that this individual undertook, I think it identifies for us the warnings and indicators, the pre-operational surveillance, the kinds of things that we need to be thinking about, looking at, and preparing for in terms of our security strategy. So this individual, Mohammed Momtaz al-Hazari, was arrested in mid-May of 2020 by the FBI. At that time, he was attempting to buy an AK-style weapon online. He was charged with attempting to provide material support to ISIS, obviously a designated terrorist organization. While he was in custody, his sister, on May 29th, came to the Tampa Police Department that was part of the local law enforcement agency involved in his arrest. She made a phone call while she was outside the Tampa Police headquarters. An officer came out to talk with her, and she pulled out a knife. And if you see the video online, she went to great lengths. He, advised her to drop the knife, to drop the weapon, usual, police protocols. She kept swinging, coming at him, and the officer shot and killed his sister at that time. So clearly, the family was deeply radicalized. As I mentioned, he's pledged allegiance to the leader of ISIS. Now, if you start looking now, kind of in a after the fact, listen, learn perspective, we know that he searched online for hotels, casinos, resorts, amusement parks, beaches, state parks, concert houses. So mass gatherings, public assembly venues, where could the most people be killed? Soft targets. He started that online research. That online research brought him to a focused target at Honeymoon Island State Park in the Tampa area. We know that he made a 2-hour round trip visit to now conduct not just, online research, but to do on-site pre-operational surveillance. We also know that he acquired firearms, he acquired ammunition, and he searched for silencers. He sought training in firearms and self-defense. We also know that he searched for disguises. He also made videos and recordings. And in those videos and recordings, he was actually going through a dry run. So he planned to target a public assembly location with the ability to inflict mass casualties. And that was that Honeymoon Island, Clearwater Beach area, based on the complaint report and the indictment. What were the warnings and indicators? Well, we've touched upon them, but more so, he was arrested and incarcerated in Saudi Arabia on terrorism charges. I believe he was in prison there for a couple of years. He was also arrested at a Home Depot here in the United States for carrying a concealed weapon that he was not licensed to carry. We know that he did online activity, looking at websites, forums, chat rooms that discussed these kinds of tactics and ISIS propaganda and related attacks. He was fixated on the Pulse nightclub shooting that took place in Orlando, Florida. I think that was in 2015. Another, individual that became radicalized and killed dozens of individuals at that particular nightclub. There were observations by his coworkers that commented on the fact that he spoke about guns, he spoke about threats, he spoke about violence. It was clearly that there was a radicalization taking place. And again, the fixation on the Pulse nightclub. So you say, what? How with all of that? How is it that we weren't able to pick this guy up sooner. Well, it's difficult. The old adage, if you see something, say something, is crucially important. The fact of the matter is, even though there were previous run-ins with law enforcement, until that pre-operational surveillance took place, the FBI and local law enforcement didn't have full visibility on the extent of the radicalization taking place. So it goes back to, we're going to prevent these events from taking place by some individual, seeing an anomalous behavior, seeing something suspicious, and taking the right steps to notify law enforcement. And fortunately, that's what took place here. I want to go into a little bit now about the unique circumstances of the environment we're in. And that is that the societal stress, that I call it, that we've been dealing with, society's been dealing with over the past year. Families having concerns about healthcare, economic impacts of COVID, on the market, on jobs, on unemployment. It's clearly the social unrest that's taken place in cities across the United States, and frankly, the political divisiveness that we all experienced, during the presidential campaign. All of these, have really put, people in society in a very stressful mode. And those kinds of stressors, trigger behaviors that we need to be aware of and need to be prepared to deal with. And that's where the importance of de-escalation training comes in. In any conflict, you have a choice to either de-escalate or allow it to escalate. And we want to talk briefly about some of the important steps that organizations should be doing. I believe, and I think Mark and the Mark brothers will confirm, that we need to be training all of our frontline staff. Oftentimes, it's just a matter of some security people or operations people that get this kind of training. But really, any individual that's dealing with patrons, the public, are going to come into situations where situations going to potentially escalate, and they need to have those skills and techniques. I'm seeing it. I'm dealing with clients in the restaurant industry, in healthcare, in education, in grocery stores, any facility where, patrons are coming in, the public are coming in, whether it's COVID related, social distancing, whether it's, disagreements over masks, you name it. People are stressed, and situations are getting escalated. So reasoning with an angry person is not possible. Two key concepts when we talk about de-escalation. You can't reason with somebody that's angry. The goal there is just to reduce that level of agitation. De-escalation techniques themselves are inherently abnormal. Why is that? Well, because our natural instinct is to mirror or mimic the behavior that we're being confronted with. If someone's being angry with us, we tend to either get angry back, or we tend to, get out of harm's way. But learning the techniques of de-escalating that situation is not something that comes natural. It takes practice, it takes training. So your safety is paramount. We teach 4 steps to de-escalation. Number 1 is recognizing and assessing the situation. Again, your safety is paramount. If you feel that there is a threat to you being bodily harmed, if you feel that the individual that you're dealing with is not going to allow you to react and have a discourse in a reasonable way without you yourself becoming angry or defensive, you need to make that early assessment and to eradicate yourself from that personal situation, or call in for some additional assistance. Secondly, you want to respond calmly. You don't want to, as I said, mimic that behavior, and realize that the anger and frustration that an individual may be exhibiting is not exhibited or pointed towards you per se. They're frustrated and they're angry about something, and you happen to be the one in their sight and that they're dialoguing with. So you become the brunt of that. So you try not to take it personal. You don't want to, allow yourself to get angry and show sarcasm or inflexibility. You want to remain calm. You want to talk in a calm manner, and you want your bodily communication to be that way as well. You want to listen with empathy. So people may not be able to do what they want, but they have a right to feel whatever they want. And so you want to be able to let them unload, listen to what they have to say, and respond in a calm, professional way and try to give them alternatives. Validate and show respect. And this is where your nonverbal, the way you conduct yourself is so important. When we think about communication, there's a rule called 55, 35, 10. And 10% of the communication is the words that you use. So people only recognize about 10% of what the words you're actually saying. About 30% of what you're saying is by the tone and the elevation of your voice. And the major part of it is your body language. So 55, 35, 10. When you're communicating, body language is extremely important. You want to maintain, a reasonable eye-to-eye level. You want to allow extra space. You want to not stand, face to face in a threatening manner. You don't want to stare them in the eyes. Keeping, periodic eye contact is fine, but you don't want to, appear threatening in that respect. You don't certainly want to point, shake fingers. You want to keep your hands open and your palms empty so they don't feel threatened. And again, you always have the permission to retreat. And so if you feel that the situation is not de-escalating, then you need to remove yourself from that situation. You need to, call security, your supervisor, or just, make sure that you're getting out of harm's way. And we teach this to people in all different industries. We're seeing a huge uptick in this in the energy sector, where field personnel are dealing with, upset homeowners and patrons who are, having power removed, and the relationship between that person is very volatile. We offer training. In fact, we partnered with IVM on some online training, and so I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail on that, but I just want folks to be aware that we go into these courses online, customized for mass gathering, public assembly venues. It deals with the whole range of workplace violence, situational awareness, de-escalation, excuse me, surviving an active shooter event, and even responding to injury. There's my contact information. And with that, I will turn it back to Larry or Mark.
Hello, Bill. Bill, thank you very much. We appreciate your sharing that information with us. Are there any other questions that that anyone in the audience may have? If so, use the Q&A button on the bottom of the screen, and we will address it as quickly as we can. There being none, then I would like to take the opportunity to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Mark Herrera, Law Office Commander, retired. In other words, he is the man. He is currently the Director of Education and Life Safety for the International Association of Venue Managers, and Mark hails from the wonderful state of New Mexico, where I attended the New Mexico Military Institute. Mark, take it away.
Thank you, Larry, first of all, for having me. I just want to first of all say that I truly appreciate the attendees and the opportunity to be a part of your day. Let me see if I can get my PowerPoint presentation to work here real quick. And we'll get started here. Okay. So first of all, I just want to say, again, ESCA, when it comes to ESCA, IAVM, and even IAE, under really solid leadership between Larry Arnadette, Brad Main with IAVM, and then David Dubois, these associations have really done a really good job in coming together to understanding that we have influence in the global industry. We have a civic duty to ensure that we provide safe, secure, and healthy environments, within all public facilities where crowds assemble. All venues, all personnel working within the facility, they have to make every reasonable effort to provide safe and healthy environments to ease that level of apprehension that's out there. But we know that there is no guarantee to zero risk, right? I mean, you heard Bill just now, lay out all of the current threat landscape and the things that we would be looking at here in the future. That's not going away. Bill is absolutely right. So when we take a look at the first thing the first thing is we got to get our minds in the right place, right? We have to be able to remove that hesitation and that complacency. And really, as I roll out this live training, I talk about, the importance of understanding that sometimes our heads are in the sand, right? We don't think that it can happen to us. We don't expect crisis, right? Especially if we've never been exposed to it. So there's a really cool quote that I wanted to share with the group. And I use this within all of my training. And it says, the tragedy of life is often not in our failure, but rather in our complacency. It's not in our doing too much, but rather in doing too little. And it's not living above our ability, but rather living below our capacities. I sometimes feel that when you do the same thing over and over again and expect the same outcome, that starts building that level of complacency and hesitation. So Benjamin May said it best. I love to kick off my presentations with this quote because it basically says that we cannot allow complacency or hesitation to control us to the point that we don't properly prepare or plan for any type of situation or crisis. I also like to go into the 5 emotional traps, right? Let's think about this for a minute. These are things that I have had individuals tell me, hopelessness. When it comes to crisis, there's nothing that we can do about it, right? It's hopeless, right? Well, there is something. We're doing it right now. So we're educating people. So there is something. There's training that's available. There's free available training that's available. So the resources are there. Infallibility, it's never going to happen here. Why? Because it's never happened here before. We're good, right? I call those are famous last words. And of course, inescapability. If it's unavoidable, why do we even try to prevent it? Why? Because we have a responsibility to provide safe environments. And then invulnerability. Well, there's no way that it can happen to me. Well, guess again, think about all of these facilities, all of these organizations, and all of that have been subjected just to workplace alone here, averaging 2 or more a day for the past year, right? So it can happen to me, it can happen to us. And inevitability, if it's going to happen, why even prepare? Why? Because we have a duty to act. We have a responsibility to protect people and place them in safe environments to the best of our ability. Granted, we can't guarantee zero risk, but we can provide levels of security that minimize the risk at the end of the day. So I want us to really focus on the following things. These are some things to consider. And please keep in mind that any resource documents that we provide, I'm going to share them. I'll share them with Julie. Julie will kick them out to everybody and all the attendees that are on this call. Things to consider: understanding the current threat environment, right? I couldn't have said it any better than Bill just did, right? Listen, protecting mass gatherings requires us to identify a number of risks related to the venue and event. And just to name a few, you heard them: threats of terrorist attack, active shooters, vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices. These types of attacks are common, especially where crowds gather, right? It's being advocated, right? The ideology is out there. Fire incidents, protests, all of the civil protests that are taking place, the anarchist movements that are trying to control a lot of these different environments, to those that are reasonably trying to exercise their First Amendment, that's out there. So medical emergencies, natural disasters, these are all of the things that we need to focus on. These are all the risks that could affect anywhere that mass crowds gather. And we talk about post-COVID changes and how they have weakened our security posture. Let's think about this for a minute. Our security postures have been challenged with the focus of new technologies, new health precautions and protocols that have been now incorporated within all of our facilities, right? Things such as, now we got to focus on venues equipped with thermal scanning, health and sanitation programs, policies and procedures, social distancing, room and seating configurations now are no longer the same. New on-site rules at each venue, and venues emphasizing on the use of face covering, right? So when we have a narrow focus on just the health precaution, we miss the train coming from the other side on the security front. And I can tell you right now, to Bill's point, and Mark Camillo, who chairs the Commercial Facility Subsector Coordinating Council, they're going to tell you that the advocacy, the ideology is out there to really affect all of our facilities that have become anemic because of the general focus to the health precautions. They're overlooking the security posture. So we can't lose sight of that. Take it number
Hey,
3,
Mark.
organizational.
Hey, Mark, can I just stop real quick? We got a question
ma'am.
from the audience here.
Sure.
Kayla, you have a question. You just need to press unmute and you can ask Mark directly. Let's see. She looks like she's still on mute here. All right. Well, Kayla, when you're ready, go ahead and unmute. You can jump in. Hey, Mark, can I ask you one other thing since I already interrupted you?
Sure.
Can you click on that presentation mode? We're seeing your slide viewer mode where the next slide and your notes are in there. Just that one next to it. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in there.
No, that's okay. I'm sorry, which one, Julie?
It's right next to it. Has got the little box with the screen and the stand on it. That's the presentation one we're seeing. Yeah, the one next to that. There you go.
Got it? Is that better?
I see. No, it's the same. That's okay. It's fine.
How about
Just leave
now?
it. Perfect. Looks great.
Is that it?
It's good enough. We're still seeing next slide, but it doesn't really matter.
Are you
That's
seeing
okay.
my notes or the slide, Julie?
Well, we were seeing both, and there was actually a really great closed captioning thing going on there. Actually,
I
that
love it.
wasn't horrible, but you're fine right now. And then Kayla, whenever you're ready, you just jump in and ask Mark your question. Go ahead, Mark.
All righty. So number 3, talk about organizational streamlining and team coordination and how important that is. Okay. Events entail a great amount of streamlining and teamwork between internal staff at all levels. This is critical in the world we live in today. Other organizations, associations, and venues that include private and public security professionals, all of these folks are collaborating to identify the current challenges on the security front. So whether you're an exhibitor, you're a service contractor, you're a meetings planner, or a venue professional, we all have a responsibility in unity to secure our facilities during an event. The coordination efforts are critical, and that should cover all aspects of people security, safety, vehicle access points or vehicle access management, entry permit management, and then Larry brought up the WIS program, ESCA's Worker Identification and Security Program, that allows entry into participating facilities by the contractors' workers who have been registered with this WIS program. There is a risk mitigation measure that has been included and added by ESCA. Also, asset protection, area familiarization for stakeholders, video surveillance, and emergency evacuation plans. Coordination efforts should also include the sharing of intelligence, right? Training, inoculating to the conditions that you will potentially encounter, and all falling under all potential risks that's related to mass gatherings. So that falls under organizational streamlining and team coordination. And listen, in the last year, mental health has become one of the most talked about challenges for American workers and their employers. Even with brighter days ahead, the mental health crisis is here to stay. How we collectively support and train employees will set the tone for guests understanding and the compliance that we're looking for to the new health protocols as events open up and the economy recovers. We talk about staff engagement and evaluation and adherence to policies and procedures. How to tap into full staff engagement is, of course, to get your staff inclusive of executive, mid-management, frontline staff to know and understand that based on the current health crisis, our operational expectations, policies, our procedures, and protocols have changed. They're different. We're no longer operating under the previous conditions post-COVID. So I always talk about the most important asset within any organization, and that is the frontline staff. They have a tremendous amount of responsibility, and that they now have to manage security-related issues, right? Think about it: guest service issues, security-related issues, and now compliance with all the health protocols and guidelines. So how do we engage all of our staff, exhibitors, those that are working within our facilities, right? Employees, guest service teams, security-related teams, which all now cross-pollinate. They have to know and understand your internal policies and procedures regarding health and safety compliance as it pertains to our current health crisis, and they have to buy into the current health precautions. Compliance expectations have to be set and encouraged with staff buy-in. Empowering staff by divvying up some of the training opportunities promotes individual and peer buy-in, and employees own it at the end of the day. Keep in mind that training allows us to not only own the process, but makes the unknown familiar through what I call subconscious mind recollection, right? And the repetition allows us to control the body's physiological effects during uncomfortable situation, which allows employees to take the guesswork out of the appropriate response to any given condition. But we have to inoculate these employees to the conditions that they're going to be exposed to, and we have to do it repetitively, right? There's a program that I have shared with the industry. It's called a near-miss reporting or a post-operational debrief, a near-miss reporting program, right? What is near-miss reporting? A near-miss is an incident with the potential to cause loss or harm, but there was no loss or harm that occurred. It was basically a close call. Listen, after every event, if we sat down and said, I need everyone, all of the employees to identify a near miss, an occurrence that could have happened but didn't, right? It was managed, but it could have gone bad. Could be a security risk, could be a condition of, the facility that was a risk, could be a guest service concern, right? These are all considered near miss. Between everyone in your respective facility, there's enough experience to share that will get everyone to zero harm. We're simply creating a platform with this near miss program to increase what I call our hazard library, right? Near miss reporting is a good leading indicator for potential health, safety, and security trends. The more of these stories and data points that we can share based on an event where we observe these near misses, we can collectively come up with means to mitigate those types of risks. And what we're doing now is we're storing information, real-time information, in what I call the subconscious part of the mind that is always subject to recall, right? So the near miss program seems to work really well with the industry. If I was to task every one of you in this webinar to come up with 3 near misses at an event, we could share them with the entire group. I reward and recognize you for the entry, right? So it's a award and recognition program, but at the same time, we're learning how to mitigate a risk collectively together. So when the employees encounter that, instinctively, they respond with the correct action at the end of the day. I talk about risk mitigation best practices. Who is responsible for providing the best in guest services and customer experience? We tend to think that there is a dedicated person within every facility who only just one person that fulfills that particular role. However, guest service belongs to all operating within a facility. The guest service approach can potentially reduce risk from those who may struggle to comply with facility protocols. It can also be used to approach individuals whose behavioral patterns are not conducive to the environment, whereby posturing in such a way indicates typical behavior observed prior to threat engagement, right? An individual that is going to create harm involuntarily begins to posture and shows the behavior that's not conducive to the environment. The key is, are we training our staff to understand those types of behavior? And how are we going to interject to diffuse and remove that type of behavior without triggering? And I always say we utilize the guest service approach, right? Listen, if you approach me with a good guest service approach and I have ill intent, that's going to affect my ability to carry out potentially a threatening condition, right? Because I want to create mass havoc. I want to create mass destruction. Well, now I know all eyes are on me. However, I'm not too sure. It was a guest service approach. That's enough to mitigate a lot of risk. So we talk about that. Those seem to be risk mitigation, are basically smart practices that are applicable to all. And we all have to conduct what is called assumptive risk analysis. That's everyone working in the environment of mass gatherings. We should be focused on knowing ingress, egress access points, the wait times, right? Because that is what the threat is targeting. We should all be aware of, all staff should be alert and report attempts to access restricted areas. Identify abandoned bags or backpacks and adhere to those protocols on how do we secure those? Are we conducting canine sweeps or trying to conduct canine sweeps before an event and after an event? Because we know that there's a threat of improvised incendiary explosive devices where they are planting explosive devices, even as trial runs take place. So are we investigating guest complaints regarding odd noises and or strong odors? What are the facility plans? Do they include instructions for rapid implementation of procedures for evacuation, isolation, or decontamination, and notification of appropriate authorities? Are you enforcing policies and procedures and posting signage, right? Collaborating with local, state, and federal agencies and highlighting your training. These are all the things that we should focus on that are a deterrent, all right? There's a list of pre-assault indicators, right? We always talk about these pre-assault indicators, and there is a plethora of them, right? Again, I mentioned the threat before he crosses over, he or she, they will posture, they will show these pre-assault indicators, the nervousness, the inappropriate clothing, the concealing of the hands, the confirmation touch, making sure that the weapon is easily accessible, bulges near the waist and the hip, waistband, right? Tunnel vision, that 1,000-yard stare where I'm just focused on my target, right? Repeated comments and prayer, muttering, difficulty making decisions when you confront them, trouble communicating, individuals that you see commonly seated at entrance and exits displaying everything else. Remember, they're trying to remove themselves from the facility if they can. So these are just some examples, right? Talk about hosting meetings and events in a world affected by COVID is going to require major adjusting, right? Social distancing can make people feel very isolated and lonely and can increase stress and anxiety. The stress during an infectious disease outbreak has caused fear and worry about your own health and the health of everyone. Financial loss, the loss of support, all of your social and support structure and functions, right? That social network that now you've been isolated. These are the things that people are suffering when they've been furloughed, laid off, removed from their social networks. And now they're coming into a world of recovery where they're getting to mingle, co-mingle at all of our events, but they're going to have to follow certain protocols and may not be apt to do so. So that's critical and important to be aware of that. So we talk about verbal de-escalation. Bill mentioned it. Verbal de-escalation is what we use during potentially dangerous or threatening situations in an attempt to prevent a person from causing harm to us and or others, and even themselves. But without specialized training, we should never consider the use of physical force. Verbal de-escalation is important because it consists of tactics to help limit the number of staff who might be injured on the job. And I posted in the chat, I asked Lori Garza, who is one of our leads a group on de-escalation training, and she posted on the chat a de-escalation training with a gentleman that I reached out to who actually trains and teaches verbal judo, a very common tactic utilized within law enforcement that is very applicable to our industry on how to de-escalate hostile situations. Listen, it's going to be challenging because think about this for a minute. The best example I can give you, telling someone to wear a mask, even though we know it's the right thing to do, right? Feels like asking someone to stop smoking or to take their shoes off at your house, right? It can feel a little bit judgmental, a bit righteous, and well, kind of awkward. So after all, if someone is at your home to do work and you're paying them to do this work and they show up without a mask, but you require it, even though almost indoor space requires face coverings, they're either completely unaware or they don't care. If people are not complying, they're either unaware or they simply don't care because guess what? I've been vaccinated and I'm good to go. Now it's going to take those guest service teams. That's going to be a challenge to try to control that behavior and get them to understand how important it is to comply. So to Bill's point, the de-escalation is going to be really huge, right? I'm going to skip for the sake of time, but in conclusion, listen, I can't emphasize the importance of training to enhance mental preparation, response, and the mitigation to environmental threats. Employees need to be equipped with the tools to survive all conditions. Those that are working within the facilities, they need to learn to scan their environment and sense all of the dangers, the challenges, and the opportunities while maintaining the ability to conduct their normal activities. And that's what we're trying to accomplish here, with the information and the resources that we're providing. So with that, I'm going to yield my time. And if there's any questions, feel free to include it in the chat. I have included within the chat the Public Assembly Facilities Recovery Guide, ESCA, IAEE, These folks were a part of the development of that guide, including a lot of our working task forces that were led by industry professionals. The guides are constantly updated. Please feel free to download them. It's at no cost. And then I've included all of the IAVM live training program that is heavily supported by all of the other associations and organizations. If I can be of any assistance to you, feel free to reach out to me. But at this point, I'd like to turn it over now back to Larry so that he can introduce an industry professional that I have the highest regards for. And listen, it's really nice to be the dumbest guy in the room because I'm with two guys that are really experts within what they do, and that's Mark Camillo and Bill Flynn. So Larry, I'm gonna turn it over to you so you can introduce Mr. Camillo.
Okie doke. Good to be back. And Mark, thank you very much. That was a great presentation. And if anybody has any additional questions of Mark, if you could use the Q&A down at the bottom of the screen, we'll pick it up and someone will answer your question. With that, I have the great pleasure of introducing a wonderful gentleman who I've known in this business for many, many, many years, Mark Camillo, who is the Senior Policy Advisor at Contemporary Services Corporation. Mark is a well-known expert in critical infrastructure protection, emergency preparedness. He began his government career in law enforcement as a special agent in the U.S. Secret Service after a 21-year career that included 3 separate assignments at the White House, culminating as head of the White House security branch. Oh, I can tell you this, Mark, we could use you out there right now. I'm sure they'd love to have you back. Mark was appointed in 2013 to chair the Public Assembly Facilities Subsector Council, which is part of the commercial facilities sector. He currently chairs the Commercial Facilities Sector Coordinating Council with goals to include reducing risk to the sector, improving coordination, and strengthening security and resilience capabilities. Mark served on the John Jay College of Criminal Justice faculty in New York City as a professor, lecturer, and writer on critical infrastructure protection. With that, welcome, Mark.
Larry, it's a pleasure to be with you. And of course, I'm honored to be along with 2 esteemed colleagues, Bill Flynn and Mark Herrera. I have to say, when being invited to contribute to something like this, I view this as a peer exchange. This is not instructional. This is to promote thought in the leadership and to actually solicit feedback because it helps us too. We learn every time we come together like this. I know this gathering right now on this webinar consists primarily of operators, stakeholders, and contractors, and everybody has specific experiences and has valued opinions. And please activate your ability on this webinar to put those things out there. If from what I contribute and my piece of this, if I don't get to a solid answer for you, I'm going to do a little groundwork. As Larry said, we go back a little ways. Larry sits on the Public Assembly Facilities Subsector Council. That's one of 8 subsectors that constitutes the commercial facility sector. We have a pretty big sector. Most of you are part of it. We joined 15 other sectors, and this is all under what's called the National Infrastructure Protection Plan. Why do I share that with you? It's because the things that we're doing here in the commercial facility assembly world is very similar and has a lot of very similar key points of interest and merit to the Sports League Subsector Council and the Outdoor Events Subsector Council. You're aware, I'm sure, those of you that follow sports, which I suspect is 99% of you, we have a great council there with the NBA, the NFL, Major League Soccer, PGA, etc. They all contribute. Just like outdoor events, we have Disney, Six Flags, we have Live Nation, just by way of example. Again, these are all organizations that have brought some of their best to help in our effort to try to protect critical infrastructure across the United States. Today, I've been asked to provide some talking points for discussion. I've come up with 3 slides for you. This is relatively brief considering the topic, but I think I drilled it down to what I think is substantive. And I think it's things that many of you already know, perhaps can add to this list. and I value your input on this. The first, as you can see, was we try to move forward with restoring confidence for returning visitors and patrons and workers into our facilities is what we're being subjected to from the different state governments or their equivalent. And by that, I mean, whether it's a territory, in some states, they actually are directed by counties. And then you have the District of Columbia. They're no one is exactly the same. If you look and see what they're doing, Colorado, it varies by county. Perhaps you look at Delaware, where I live now, in coastal Delaware, outdoor events are 50%. Yet if you go to Florida, there are no restrictions. And again, outdoor events, Chicago, perhaps 25. It moves and it goes up and down. So you can't just say simply that everybody across the United States is a certain capacity. So therefore, you have to tailor your activity in your venues, both receiving guests and visitors, and also how you're able to actually send your workers into these facilities is all being affected by this. Many stadiums, and I'll focus on stadiums for a moment, they actually have created COVID seating maps. This has been going on for many months now in anticipation of a gradual reawakening of our economy. The maps, of course, are socially distanced, as you might imagine. I haven't found one professional association in our world that hasn't respected the science. I know the leagues have all focused on CDC guidelines. I suspect you have as well. And I think I agree that that's the right thing to do. The patrons, when they do come in, and many of you perhaps have already attended entertainment or sporting events, you know that you've gone into a pod. Could be expensive if the pod requires multiple seats and perhaps you only need 2. But the reality is if they don't have the ability to give you smaller seating, then it's time to find some friends. We have sometimes the awkward situation of people feel when they go in their pod that they don't have to wear face covering. And of course, I think most of you know that the policy of facilities is such that when you're in your pod, you are to wear a face covering, with the exception of when you're eating and drinking. If you have a favorite team, I would suggest you check their website and go down into their drop-down menus for safety protocols. You'll see the things that I'm talking about here. You'll see actually at your baseball, basketball, soccer, whatever sport it is, they're all trying to stay ahead of this. I know in a recent meeting that I was invited to attend with the sports leagues, the NBA is preparing for 50% by the playoffs, which is next month. And the NFL, they're actually preparing for 100% capacity by the fall. So the safety protocols have to come in lockstep with the security protocols, both adjusting accordingly to make sure that these venues, just like your convention centers, are inviting places and places where people can come in with confidence that they're both safe and secure. Entrance times are also being extended, as you might imagine, because of social distancing. And perhaps you've made adjustments. Some of the operators on the call today probably say, yep, we're doing that too. And the idea, of course, is to accommodate for social distancing. Before I go any further, I do want to thank the convention centers for stepping up and transforming into community vaccination centers, just like you did creating voting locations, just like you did for testing centers, just like you did for food banks. Every time this country needs a large facility solution to a problem, it's you. And I know that, and I want to thank you for that. So we have to now look and say, well, what do you do to maintain flow? The flow, when I say flow, I'm talking about people. I'm talking about front of the house, which is a term we use in sports and entertainment in an arena or a stadium or an amphitheater. And back of the house is where your workers, visitors, and your talent come in. Both places, you have to create flow and create distance in order to be respectful for the social distancing. We don't want a crowd to stop, as you might imagine. Bill Flynn gave a very good overview on the challenges we have with vulnerabilities in crowded places and radicalized domestic extremists. If you have a stationary crowd, it creates a stationary target. if I can put my old hat back on, the things I try to preclude with good quality advanced work. The entrance times, as I said, are being extended, and we're going to move on to the next slide. Mr. Herrera, if you can help me on that. Right there, sir.
Mark, you there? All right.
Mark Herrera,
I'm going to do it on my end.
thank you. Okay, good.
There you go, Mark. You see it? Is that okay?
Yeah, we're good. So
Okay.
thank you. Screening technologies are being tested now. As many of you may already have the experience with, is the different types of equipment used to prevent dangerous items from coming into your facilities. In this case, convention centers, whether it's a load in for a show or whether it's actually show time and here comes the visitors or here comes the ticket holders that come in. The screening technologies, we're looking at a variety of different things right now that we know the traditional walk-through metal detector can't allow for a smooth flow. And so what we're starting to look at now, and the professional leagues are actually doing a pilot testing on several different technologies for low passive millimeter wave testing. And they're actually being put in. I know the Augusta, the PGA Championship recently had one of the technologies in place called Evolve. There's another one, and that's called Evolve Express. Another one that is gaining a lot of attention and appears to be working very well is CHEA OpenGate, giving you examples of two equipment technology providers that are offering this kind of technology. And the whole idea is to reduce or eliminate the need for a patron to actually divest. We know that some of the leagues are looking more at handguns or weapons such as a shoulder weapon or a handgun versus a knife. And so we have to start making some realistic choices on how many items we can program the technology to allow in or focus on. I will say that in the testing that I'm familiar with, both those equipment providers have successfully identified handguns. It comes down now to what's your risk tolerance on anything else. The other thing that they're doing because of the artificial intelligence, it's actually allowing someone to come in with a cell phone. So again, the idea is to increase flow and to allow people to remain socially distanced. The I'll move down to the next point. Many venues are pretty much eliminating bags altogether right now. And the idea, of course, is to be cognizant of that close contact. So we're trying to eliminate that. If you look at Major League Baseball and the NBA and NFL, you'll see that they pretty much have precluded bags. Their websites are pretty clear. Signage as you approach into the buffer zones, as you approach the actual brick and mortar of these facilities, outline what can and can't come in. And the exception would be, of course, things such as a diaper bag or bags containing necessary medical items, and a clutch bag. A clutch bag is generally described dimensions as a 5-inch by 7-inch by 3/4 inch wide. We're also seeing some different screening monitoring capacity technology, which is rather interesting. It's new, being looked at, and that's the ability to actually, through the technology, observation technology, to manage the crowd density and come up with, I guess, a decision support tool as to whether you're seeing a congregation that is contrary to what the policy is of that facility, or perhaps guidelines set forth by a governing body or a conference or some other organization that promulgates what you have to do. last thing I wanted to mention was I haven't seen yet in any of the professional associations that contribute to all this effort to protect infrastructure simply dropping the guard. As Mark Herrera said, you know, the emotional traps out there. I mean, if a facility feels it's hopeless, you're gonna have a problem. If it feels that it's gonna happen somewhere else because it's not gonna happen here, you're kidding yourself. If it's unavoidable, and you're gonna get it, well, again, that's a defeatist attitude. And I think Mark outlined 5 different items he called his emotional traps. And I think they're right on. I would suggest that you keep a dialogue going with one another. ESCA is an excellent source, same with the International Association of Venue Managers. The one other item I wanted to mention is that the guidelines out there that are available to you at no cost are an excellent way to see what is being provided by either your third-party vendors for security, or if you have in-house security, to make sure that as security continues to be implemented with security countermeasures, that it also has COVID guidelines put in there at the same time. I want to make sure that you know that the Venue Professional magazine, and that's a magazine that's put out by IAVM, had an article last month. I happened to write that article, and the only reason why I say that is because that goes into more detail with the different types of screening guidelines, back check guidelines, and credential guidelines that are available to you. Again, most of which are produced by the Department of Homeland Security. You can pretty much Google or word search with your favorite search engine, and you can find the Public Venue Safety Security Guide and the other 2 that I mentioned. The National Center for Spectator Sports Safety and Security also has a very, very complete best practices guide. It's much bigger. That one was done as a result of a couple-day summit, where the other ones are much smaller, perhaps 35 to 40 pages. And those are really, in my view, good desktop references for you to use, and then just compare that with what's going on or what's being provided for you. The commercial facility sector that we're part of, and of which I chair the coordinating council, we provided 18 participants for the public venues security screening guide that's being wrapped up right now. And adjacent, or in addition to that, there's currently an addendum being created for the guidelines as they pertain to COVID contactless or touchless screening protocols. That goes into much more detail. And in that particular effort, we have a joint project with the University of Southern Mississippi through its NCS4 and the Public Venue Security Screening Working Group that's producing and updating the current guidelines that I had mentioned before. So that's all. I'm gonna stop right now. And if there's any questions, I am more than happy to help you. And I'll turn it back over to Larry.
Hello, am I live? I am live. All righty. Hi, good to be back. Mark, thank you very much. That was excellent. At this point, do we have any questions right now? Before we let Mark off the hook.
I think there's a good one in there, Larry, for Mark Herrera from Joan. I'm going to say your name wrong, Joan. I'm sorry. Eisenstadt. Did I say it right, Mark?
Yes, I think you did. Joan she has been actively involved. She really does a really great job in representing, our meeting planners and our organizers, and she's involved in a lot of our the COVID industry update calls, a lot of our different meetings. So she's really a strong advocate for those that work within the meeting industry. But she did have a good question. Can you read the question out?
Yeah. She says, what are the obligations of facilities, convention centers, et cetera, to those of us who plan events to discuss all of this at the time of both site and destination selection and during the planning process? And again, at the pre-con, must we contract it to ensure it happens?
That's a great question. And I answered it back to Joan and the entire group in the chat, but just, the success of an event is measured in many ways, right? But events must be measured in terms of safety. That's so important. Event organizers have a duty, and there's the key. It's a duty of care to provide a safe working environment and to ensure that people are not exposed to any risk or health and safety related issues. So anything that we do when we talk about planning events, you bring in all those key stakeholders that are a part of the event planning process. You have a complete checklist of all the things that you need to be aware of, such as what does the health and safety risk assessment look like? What does a health safety plan look like? What are the measures to alleviate a lot of the potential risk at that particular event with that particular event type? What does the emergency plan look like, right? Food safety considerations, crowd management concerns. Mark talked a little bit about crowd management, the crowd dynamics and the different crowd types given the different types of event. What's the parking plan look like, and the appropriate training for all staff. So all of these elements should be considered for part of the event planning process. And again, when you talk about who owns it, it's everyone that's managing that event. So when I talk about everyone, I'm thinking, your service contractors have a say, your meeting planners, organizers have a say, your venue executives and operators have a say in this planning process. So I put that in the chat, and thanks, Joan. I just received your response.
She did ask a follow-up question there that she's been asked by venues about what we've planned for clients' meetings. And what does it say? Not to be asked when one has prepared. So she says it's interesting when she's not asked because they're prepared, and she's curious how they're not asking the question and finds that a bit surprising. I think that's kind of a red flag, yeah?
It is actually, Julie, because listen, when you're talking about alleviating risk, it's a collective effort of trying to identify what those risks are through assumptive risk analysis. So if you're not asking the questions, if I'm relying on just, and I can tell you right now, if I'm relying on just the venue executive who's hosting the event there to actually come up with that emergency plan, then I'm kind of shooting myself in the foot if I see something that could potentially be a risk for my event. So it becomes a collective effort. Have a checklist available and be willing to share it, with all those key stakeholders that are part of organizing, any and all events. That's critical.
Thank you, Mark.
Yep.
Mark Camillo, it looks like there's a good question in here from you from Michael Myers. And frankly, I am personally really curious about your answer to this as well. It says, now that the CDC has indicated that the possibility of catching COVID off the surface is very low, do we need to continue the direction of touchless operations? And I'm going to add another piece to that, speaking from a contractor perspective. What are your thoughts on how you see, again, with that surface area, freight and drayage and things like that? Right now, I don't see us doing. I'm curious what your thoughts are on what we should do. And I'm going to give an example to kind of go with that. At Target, if you return something, it goes in quarantine for 48 hours. They won't put it back out on the shelf. And by all indications, that's unnecessary. So I think this is an interesting thing to get your feedback on.
Yeah, I think Michael brings up a great question. It's one we all have. And that is, at what point can we start to relax some of these things? In the beginning of COVID, which was a little over a year ago, I know my wife and I, we were wiping down groceries coming home, like many of you did. We were leaving a packet, FedEx and UPS packages in our garage overnight. We were taking the conservative route. I think right now we're still in the conservative route when it comes to this. I think that since this is a new virus, a novel coronavirus, we're seeing more evidence, and hopefully that evidence will be compelling enough, and I'm being optimistic, that the touchless efforts underway right now that I described before will begin to relax somewhat, but I've never conducted a study. I'm not a medical or healthcare provider or research scientist, so I don't know how long it takes before they can decide conclusively that that the risk is so low that they can still. I mean, after all, I'm double vaxxed and I still haven't been shaking very many hands. So I don't know about you all.
And if I could add also to what Mark Camilla just said, between us and obviously ESCA, IAEE, they had a representative that was also involved in these conversations. We started working with the Global Biorisk Advisory Council, right off the bat. This is a program that provides an accreditation to all facilities on deep cleaning and sanitizing. And I can tell you that, the concern was, especially for exhibitors, was freight, right? That was a huge thing, right? What about freight, cargo and freight? How long does the virus live there? Well, studies now based on scientific, evidence that I have been advised of is that, the freight by the time it gets into those facilities is about 3 days and the virus is non-existent. However, everybody's still taking those precautions to make sure that they're cleaning all of the freight, cleaning everything, just to make sure, because there's still a lot to Marshall that we just really don't know. So our decisions right now in regards to anything that deals with cleaning is based on the scientific evidence that GBAC is providing us.
Hey, Mark, and I wanted to add on to, and Julie made a good point. And as far as the pods and as far as the social distancing coming into entertainment and sporting venues, I mean, we don't know 100% exactly if a person can still carry this virus and be vaccinated. I know we're getting more evidence that perhaps that risk is dropping. However, until we get herd immunity, again, not a medical professional I know I look like a brain surgeon. Larry's always said that, but I don't think we're there yet. And I can tell you, if I'm in line and someone is less than 6 feet away from me, I have no idea if that person's been vaccinated until we get to that point where the confidence is high enough. I think that's when we're going to start getting closer to shoulder. But what do we have? About 21% or 22% of the U.S. is fully vaccinated right now. We got a ways to go.
Thank you so much for all that. That's great. And yeah, I think you're right. It's definitely just going to be an evolution. Mr. Flynn, a question for you that came in earlier that Larry and I both attempted to address was specific to the National Rifle Association event in Houston this year, which, as you can imagine, is an event that is incredibly secure, but also has some inherent risks. If you were involved in that event in any way, shape, or form, would there be anything that you would do different considering where we're at today in today's climate, so to speak?
Yeah, I think that, Mark Herrera spoke about the kind of the collective responsibility, and there is a shared responsibility. One of the things we worked on with the security guidelines and best practices for convention centers was looking at an objective way of identifying exceptional events. And that means, you have a brick and mortar facility, you have an event coming to that facility, and there are inherent risks. They could be low because it's a National Floral Association, gathering, or they could be much higher because it's a National Rifle Association. So clearly, that is an organization that generates some interest and strong positions from people, and inherently it's a type of event that will get either publicity and the likelihood of protest or some other some other type of social discourse in terms of its value and its appropriateness to that level. So I would be looking at events that, like the NRA, an event that like the International Association of Police Convention. I attended that, for 20 some odd years, and it was a very, very well planned, well attended, secure event. in this day and age, that dynamic has changed. And those kinds of events have to be looked at in terms of what are some of the objective criteria that need to be evaluated. And that is, are we seeing any intelligence, the importance of social media monitoring, the importance of coordination with your local law enforcement, coordination with your Joint Terrorism Task Force, coordination with your local protective security advisors, fusion centers, to understand, are they hearing, seeing anything out there that would indicate that there is chatter and potential higher risk associated with this event. And I think you do have to take some added precautions when you have events that can be can trigger some some potential political backlash. And that, I think, is a shared responsibility between the facility and the event organizers, because it's likely going to require an additional element of screening and security that you may not be undertaking for an event that doesn't have the same kind of level of risk associated with it. And so I would be looking at that. I would take a look at the guidelines that we developed, because in there we looked at what we called an exceptional event, and that was objective criteria in terms of the nature of the event, where the event is taking place, what we're hearing and seeing in social media, and a half a dozen or so criteria that would give you some metric in whether or not this event raises itself to a higher level that would at minimum require closer coordination with local law enforcement, perhaps having local law enforcement participate in some security aspect of the event, perhaps doing canine sweeps. And so, yes, I would certainly be looking at those kinds of events in the hostile, kind of divisive social unrest environment we're in, where it could potentially warrant some additional security.
And if I could add to what Bill just said as well, there's always that misconception there. I don't know how many times I've heard this, that look, when we start adding all of these security measures to our facilities, it basically breeds paranoia, and that's not true. Preparedness beats paranoia. I always said preparedness will always beat paranoia. The more we secure our environments, the safer people are going to feel going into those environments. And we can't emphasize that enough. And so, and then when we talk about even within internally, the teams that are working with those facilities, a lot of times you have the question of, how do you manage these situations where people are non-compliant within the delicate times that we're in right now? And I said, listen, it's okay to profile behavior, not people. Profile behavior that is not conducive to the environment. I can't emphasize that enough, because we did a presentation for about 7,000 students here in Dallas. And I said, listen, once the bell has rung, you can't unring it. And if you sat on information and you reduced you really lighten up on your security posture, guess what? Lives were affected. So it's better to be prepared. I'd rather give you the tools to effectively mitigate risk and to provide a safe and secure environment than none at all, right? So that was so important. So I just want to say that there can never be too much in the safety precautions. And to Bill's point, a lot of this information regarding the event type is all in our security guidelines that ESCA, IAEE, and IAVM was a part of in developing alongside with Bill and Al. And so those are going to go into what we call a secure venues portal, so that our members will have access to those guides, through the membership.
Right. I have one last question that I was texted, actually. So our very anonymous asker wants to know if you guys can put on, a little bit of a different industry and put on your predicting the future hat. Do you think air travel is going to require a vaccine? Do you think it'll be a vaccine / or take a test? Do you think it'll depend on the country, the city, the airline? What are each one of your thoughts on what air travel is going to look like?
Well, I'll start off. I understand the federal government right now has a stance that it does not want to get into the vaccine accreditation business, and then maybe that works at the moment for for the federal government, but I will say as soon as you leave this country and go somewhere else, all bets are off. And I think there's already airlines that have programs. I think it's American Airlines. I'm sure somebody's flown lately. I haven't flown in a pretty long time now. I think they call it Verifly. And so there are measures in place to come up with some type of authentication that you've indeed been vaccinated, either the 2-dose Moderna or Pfizer, or the 1-dose J&J. So I think it's inevitable. I know we got a cruise scheduled next year. They want to see my vaccine card. I'll mail them a copy.
And Julie, it's easier for this team of panelists to forecast hostile encounters than it is what do the health precautions look like in the near future, right? Because it just continuously evolves and changes, right? So it's like we're hesitant to go out there, but know that, there's going to be change. There's going to be no new protocols in place, even within the airline industry. And for those on this call that want to join the COVID industry update call, Larry participates representing ESCA, but you're welcome to join. That's bi-weekly, and that's where we'll have members from infectious disease, U.S. travel, and these folks that really provide solid updates. So that's the place to get the information, and or our town halls that we have with all the venue types. But I'm opening up that invitation to the group. So if you're interested, reach out to Julie. I'm happy to send Julie the calendar invite so you can hear all the latest and the greatest and the updates bi-weekly.
All right. Well, with that, I don't have any additional questions. Larry, do you have any for this panel? No? Okay. All right, gentlemen. On behalf of ESCA, we cannot thank you enough for your time, for your preparedness, and for contributing to our industry continued safety. The knowledge and expertise that you guys have is just incredible, and I really enjoyed listening to you, and I know that our attendees did as well. So I personally cannot thank you enough. And with that,
thank you, Julie, for coordinating this. You did a really great job rounding this whole thing up under Larry's leadership. We really appreciate Larry's leadership through ESCA, and we, the panelists, IVM, are here to support ESCA throughout this entire process.
thank you all so much. And
Mark and I see each other weekly, but Mark and Bill, it's truly a pleasure to see you guys after all this time.
Happy to contribute.
Thank you so much.
Looking forward to connecting in
safe.
person. Be good, be safe.
oh, Mark Camillo, they
Yeah.
want to know, were you on POTUS detail in '94?
In '94, I was no, I got off of Bush 1 in '92. '93, I was at the training academy. I was an instructor.
And do you know a Tony Villa?
Yes, I do.
All right. Well, Mr. Cotter, I will make sure that you get his contact information. You guys can take that chat.
And Julie, Tony Villa
Via.
is the one that is providing us. He's contracted out, and he's providing us the information and the attachments in regards to the improvised incendiary explosive devices and all the documents and all the case studies. He's the one that's providing us with that information. So he's a wealth of knowledge and a strong contributor to the industry.
He is indeed. He's a good man.
All right. Well, if anybody has any other questions that come in after, please send them to me. I'll pass them on. I'll connect you with our speakers. We've recorded this information and we'll share everything with you. So thank you all so very much and have a great day.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Julie.
Thanks, guys.